Welcome to Bonsai Time. Today, in our first released episode, we have an interview with Dan Robinson, my bonsai teacher. And Kevin and I actually just went to Dan's place and we worked on trees with him for a few days. So that's when we recorded this interview back in January. And Dan is, I guess I'll say, he is a long-time bonsai practitioner. He's been doing it for 60 years plus now. He's done everything from collecting all around the country, all around the US and Canada, and including growing from seed and lecturing and writing articles. So he's kind of a classic, one of the first major bonsai people in the US, I would say, outside of the Japanese American community. And nowadays, he's not traveling and lecturing as much, so he's kind of just on his bonsai island at Elandan Gardens. So we were really excited to go out and interview him and share his bonsai philosophy and his proclivity and thinking about ancient trees with everyone at home. So hope you enjoy.
Yeah, Ryan was asking me today, what do you want to practice in your time here? I was like,
yeah,
definitely carving, because I have carving.
You come visit Dan Robinson then.
Right.
Got it.
And then just overall more styling work. Like tomorrow I'll show you some of the stuff I was wiring.
Mm-hmm.
More so just getting used to proper flow, as
line?
Exactly, yeah, with the eye and movement. I think I've gotten better from what I was doing. I mean, you saw the photos I sent. You can see a line. I ask my wife all the time, what do you think? Because she's no, it needs to change this way, that way. She's seen a lot of them being in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's if anything, really anything you throw at me, I'll be down to try.
Yeah. Well, again, my whole thing is it's linear. It's bad.
Boring.
And so in the wiring, what I noticed about a lot as a principal, I remember seeing Ryan Neal wiring a pine, and he was correctly declaring or stating that the gradual wire is where the strength of the wire is to hold the bend. But that means you don't do tight curves. So out the door, how do you do tight curves, which makes things look more better? And so to me, I've always double wired in the first place, and I put my curves much closer to protect the thing from breaking. And you don't get as much utilization out of the wire strength necessarily. Of course, he's a copper wire guy, but copper wire is, to me, it's just kind of worthless because you can't put it on tight. Big wire, you can't do it like this.
Right.
It isn't going to go on. It's going to go on gradually, and that forces you to have a rangy design, and rangy designs take the eye away from the value, and the value is the trunk. And how can I get foliage right next to it?
Right on it.
So you're kind of caught in that. I haven't thought about that for a long time, but that's just a reality in my mind. So
how did you come to incorporate that in your style? Like, was that just the initial response that you had to what you saw?
I never had any instruction.
That's cool. That's cool. from the ground up, or the barn.
So much for higher education.
Right, what am I spending my money on? Okay.
So much of what I did was just figuring out how to get it done.
Being in the mountains.
Yeah, well, and seeing
Seeing
that in nature, and
right.
I mean, I've got a great trunk to show you
Please.
underneath the redwood trees. You know that one where that tree apparently fell on that pine? It was a ponderosa. This was up in the mountains someplace.
Okay.
And it just the trunk was this big, and it took these branches, and they are like this, peeled off of that trunk.
Wow.
And they grew.
Wow.
Oh, is
And
that
it left a part in the center.
Was that the cross one?
Well, it's a dead thing.
I
You know
know.
where that big mortar and pestle is out there?
Yeah, I know the tree.
Yeah. And I kept it just to show people,
Right.
well, this is how nature did it.
Right.
How can I simulate that? That
Right.
means
Right.
hollowing out things and tearing things and all of those
Taking the cues from
methodologies to bend things and figure out how to make it work. And Kimura, to a large degree, does that. But of course, he doesn't ever teach his people how to do it. But in some of his early shortenings of trunks, in his first books, where he's taken all the wood out, and then he can take this trunk and twist it up and shorten it down to where it's only this big instead of this tall, by just going down to the cambium and a little bit of the sapwood and taking all the heartwood out of there and carefully supporting it as you bend it.
Right. Right.
And
And is that including the wire spine to add support too with the raffia?
well, yeah, the wire, of course, will hold the position for you real good. And anyhow, is this your pruner here?
Yeah.
God, what a hog!
Yeah.
This is a hog.
I can cut up to
Big branches.
Yeah.
some wire gauges that are pretty nice. Okatsunis. They're heavy, but I do them for bigger cuts, not.
Probably good for landscape trees.
Yeah, I've used this on a lot of maples.
Yeah, it's this is this is my tool of choice, and it's $35.
Oh yeah.
30.
This one was.
Oh, 30. I'm sorry. Well, I was counting.
Now we know who runs the store.
Well, that's the tax on the top.
Oh, Joshua Ross. Nice.
Yeah,
Local too.
and we have sold hundreds of those to people who come in with these big old hog type pruners that cost $85 or $90 or $100. Some with a ratchet on it, and some with gears for pruning in their yard, and they all leave a stub.
Yeah.
And I said, the stub is the enemy unless you're going to carve it and turn it into value added.
Right. Right.
So cut them flush. Don't let that stub stick out on your yard pruning or anything else. So.
With your yard pruning, I mean, the thing that I noticed about Ryan was directing me to where to turn. I was expecting this like really fast turn. I'm like, oh, I got to turn quick, because I was like, okay, I've got 10 minutes, I've got 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, a minute, okay, well, close. And then I saw the Elandan without the Elandan, but I saw the den.
Yeah, the Dannon. That's what it says. And that's what my son-in-law used to call me. Dannon.
And, I saw the Milwaukee trees up front.
Yeah.
I've been trying to more get my clients on some of that as far as proper technique for certain pine trees. Because there's a lot of eastern white pine out there,
Yeah.
You do certain things with it, but can't so much.
It's not much good. I've got one in the property, one parviflora or whatever it is, next to the big rock when you walk out there.
They're all native.
And I prune it, and it's it's a nice tree, but it's just kind of junk. They don't behave.
Yeah.
And so I just have not gone to the trouble to figure out how you're going to get them to.
I said I don't behave either.
And I haven't figured that out either, so there you go. But it's, the hard pines are fabulous. And black pine and red pine are terrific. Scots pine is good. I haven't really figured it out too much because I have one as a bonsai. And I have one that I've had for 50 years in a big pot out there that's pretty nice. And I never prune it. It just looks good. And so don't beat yourself up.
Right.
Until it forces you to it, like that redwood.
Right.
It just looks so bad. And it was such a fabulous tree. And to have all of that wonderful trunk with a shitty foliar presentation was just an insult. So I decided. So we spent the 4 days working on it. Of course, they're short days. but it looks terrific now. I'm just, it's like that Hinoki that
Yeah.
I took you out to.
Yeah.
That to me is, boy, that's nifty.
It
It
is.
just looks so clean, and like you correctly observed, well, that one looked. Remember when I got done with it and you couldn't see any foliage
Yep.
on it?
Yep.
It was all just branch and trunk. And now it's all bushy with
Right.
all this bright green foliage.
Right.
And you haven't seen my super one. I've got a super one that's on the ground to the left when you go out the door, but it's
Oh, you?
the super Hinoki. No, it isn't here, down at the garden. When you go out the back door, it's hard to lift. The one with the big trunk that I've hollowed out the inside of the trunk on it.
Mm.
Just a wonderful tree. But it really needs a haircut. I mean, it's just beautiful right now.
Is that the one that has the real fat base?
Yeah.
Did we see that one?
No.
We're talking about how long it was.
It's down on the ground, kind of under the
Okay.
leaves of that tree on the left. I'll show you that tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it's just so beautiful. But it's just all wrong.
Ah.
And
Here's
there's
another.
nobody that prunes those Hinokis right,
Mm.
except me. Because if you don't keep after it, it's going to get bigger. And bigger, well, it's not bad.
Right.
But if you want it to stand still and be terrific, you got to sparse it.
Right.
Means you got to go back to the last little bit of green on each one of those sprays. So it's one of these, only have one of those in your collection. And I've got 5 or 6 in there, so it's just kind of.
I'm still working on the Hinokis. You saw the one I'm trying to do where it's the idea I have is like, I don't know what it is about me and cliffs. Maybe because I grew up seeing a mountain every day when I was a kid, but having like a cliff slate, if you think of like a long extended arm and then the cliff edge this way and the rest of the mountain going down, and you always see a tree sometimes falling on the directly edge, and then the apex is growing up now, right? I have this Hinoki that I turned into a raft, kind of raft that I'm going to plant on top of a rock and build it up that way and make it look like something like that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how to, like you said, not make it, make it.
Yeah.
It's just time.
Yeah. I have right now. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 6 or 7 dwarf Hinokis. One is Nana, which is the superior of any of them. See, the dwarf Hinoki, Obtusa nana, half the foliage is vertical. Half of it lays flat, which is a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Because you got to wire the verticals to lay flat.
Right.
And if you do that, that's like that one out there,
Right.
where everything is flat on there.
Right.
It looks fabulous.
Right.
The one across the street from it is the same way.
Right.
But there's one in the room in there that's on the ground. That's that Gracilis nana. So everything lays flat on that variety, but you hardly ever find them.
Right.
Most of the stuff are Obtusa nana. And then I've got a new one. I don't know whether you've seen it. Maybe you have. It looks like the foliage looks like a fern. I'll show you.
I think I've heard of this type, but I don't know that I've seen the one that you have.
Yeah, it's really quite beautiful. Beautiful foliage on it. Strange looking, because it looks like fern fronds. But pretty nifty and very delicate. I killed the whole side of the tree and hollowed it out, carved it. And I got it from a nursery down in, actually a bonsai nursery down in Sacramento. What is his name? Maruyama. Uzo Maruyama. And he's about the main bonsai guy in the Sacramento area that's at least oriental. No.
Do you burning techniques when you did wood?
No.
I know it's big.
It's terrible because it gets rid of the sharp edges.
Right.
See, what's wonderful about the die grinder and stuff, if you do it right, is that you have sharp edges. And that is like that sublimated wood.
Right. Well, you showed me today. Yeah.
Otherwise, it looks like it's sandblasted. And so, with the burning, And so to me, it's just wrong. It can look nice. It's like when dead wood is polished. Well, it's like what people do with driftwood. You know, they have driftwood shows and they polish and, sand it, make it people friendly, which is a nice thing to do. But it's
aesthetically pleasing.
Just not if you want to make a thing look natural. It's just like how to deal with that shari on the cupressus. Do you want it to be a shari or do you want to look like old wood?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's always the reality is that on some trees, some wood that when you just take the bark off, you've got this smooth surface, and that quite often is very impervious to decay. It can last a long, long time.
Some species.
Whereas the wood behind sometimes will rot out, leaving that skin. And you see that on hardwoods a lot. I don't see it a lot, but I've seen pictures of it. There's a guy in Europe, some place in France, that specializes in dead wood and bonsai, and he had quite a few.
Right. How did you find Dan? Did you ever tell me?
I
know you
remember.
said you searched online.
Yeah. So
what made you?
I was looking for summer internships, mostly for my job, but then I found Graham Potter on YouTube doing carving demonstrations, and then from there I was like excited about bonsai again, where I had just been like curious about it before that. So I started looking into the possibility of bonsai apprenticeships and seeing people on like people that seem professional and knowledgeable on the bonsai subreddit. So I reached out to one of those people that in his flair, he said he was in the Pacific Northwest, and he was always very knowledgeable and helping people and answering questions. And that was Frank. Yeah, so Frank would always give people very detailed explanations and all these things. So I messaged him.
Very articulate.
I was like, oh, where in the Pacific Northwest are you? Because I'm right here in Seattle. I was hoping to help him with his trees. And he's like, oh, actually, I don't have that many trees you can help with, but I got you an even better offer. You can come to my teacher's place, or Frank's teacher. You. So, yeah, that's how that happened. And then I met Dan and Diane at one of the Pacific Bonsai, or Puget Sound Bonsai Association meetings. And then probably the next week I was here pruning landscape pines and landscape maples and working my way up from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, it's like Patty. I take anybody who wants to volunteer to help stuff. I mean, why not? I got a lot of ground to cover down there. And
yeah, you do have a lot of ground.
It's
a lot of ground there.
But it's just wonderful.
I
mean, it's about my best creative expression, I guess, on some level. I've done some really wonderful landscaping jobs for people, and I'm still tending them. I've got a tree that I pruned, that I planted. I bought it out of a house in North Seattle way back around 1961 or 62 or something like that. It was a Scots pine, and it was probably about this big and had a nice shape, and somehow this guy was willing to sell it, and I bought it, and then I had it at this nursery, and then I had it at this nursery, and I was in a crescent-shaped bowl, and finally let's see, I'm trying to remember if I ever had it here at my first house. I think I probably did. And then finally I used it on a landscaping job in the early 70s. And now the trunk is this big. And it's about, a 12-foot ladder. I'll get you up to it.
It's a good ladder.
And just fabulous limbs. And the needles are this long.
Wow.
And it takes me 6 or 7 days to prune it each year.
How big is the diameter of the whole tree, including branches?
Oh, probably Of course, it fluctuates, but probably maybe 8 or maybe 10 feet at the most, I suppose.
That's significant. Yeah, that takes a
But
long
it's
time.
just,
That's a lot.
and the limbs just are just,
Right.
and tiny little shoots and thousands of them.
So you pretty much decandle every year?
Every year I climb up and I'll spend all day on this branch.
It takes you a good week, you say?
8 days.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I've got my daughter working on it now.
Mm.
So but it didn't speeden it up because every cut you get to. I mean, that's the problem.
Right.
And it's been 50 years. Well, it's been 65 years of pruning it because I got it back in the early 60s.
Mm.
So it's one of these things that's just kind of hopeless, but it is just fabulous.
Right.
And, shaggy old bark on it. Scout spines are really quite wonderful.
I like them.
There's
Really
slightly bluish cast to it, but you look at it and I pruned the orchard. There's about 7 or 8 130-year-old Ravensteen apple trees with trunks this big, and they are just like perfect bonsai trees.
I saw the one you pointed that one out.
And I just got done pruning them just a couple of weeks before Christmas, and they're covered with lichen for the winter view. And here's these gnarly things with this beautiful lichen on them, and it's just, you look at them, and nobody does that kind of pruning.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Right.
And of course, I do the same thing with lace leaves and everything. Everything is pruned into that sublime, orderly, wonderful discipline.
Right. Shape.
And on the maples, it's just, you cut it to the first bud. Every shoot gets cut to the first bud, assuming that's an extension.
Right.
So they put out this much, or they put out this much. And the only time you would vary is if it really had an anomalistic new growth shoot that, well, I'll cut that a little bit longer because that looks good. But otherwise, everything goes back to that first bud.
Right.
And that forces a dichotomy. And dichotomy becomes forking beautiful.
That's true, yeah.
And that is it. That's the answer to it. Now, there's a lot of big things that have to go in that session, but for the amateur, I tell them, well, you could prune it for a couple of years. You better call me back after that. But I tell them, just cut every new growth. Mid-July, go out and defrock it, and you'll be down to a fraction of the foliage left, but you'll see that trunk and all of that beauty in there.
Exactly.
And it's exactly the same thing you do with bonsai.
Did you get into landscaping first before bonsai?
Yeah.
You did? That's just,
I was
that's a job,
pruning
right?
trees from when I was a little kid. I had a grandfather who had he was a lawyer, but he had a big house in Seattle, which I had nothing to do with. I was too young, but then he had a summer place down here on Puget Sound, on the bay down here, about 30 miles from here. It was a summer place. It was a raw piece of land, but it had some old apple trees from a former farm. And they built a place there, and we grandkids would come up all summer long growing up, and I'd help him in the garden.
Oh, nice.
So he wasn't any more than just a kind of a gardener, but he loved organics.
Hobbies kind of deal?
And he loved to make humus piles and all that kind of stuff, which I don't have anything to do with any of that because I don't need any humus because I don't grow any vegetables,
Right.
And so, but I'd prune the trees, and he'd sit down under the tree and cut them all up into little pieces and put them in the humus pile. But I got into a kind of an artistry. About the only thing I remember him ever telling me as a clue was to let the sun in. So open it up to let the sun into the fruit. You get more sugar in the fruit. Now I was with a sugar devotee, and so that worked great for me.
Were you born in Seattle, or where were you born?
Yeah.
You were? Okay.
Yeah. Genuine Seattleite.
Washingtonian.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, with your landscaping, then, how did you learn how to do?
Well, I just kind of started doing that. Actually, that isn't fair. I helped my grandfather around this summer place, and we built bulkheads, and I grew up really strong because I used to go out I used to row to the distant islands, collect logs, and roll them back, and then I'd cut them up with a crosscut saw.
Oh, wow.
For firewood. I did that for years. I'd tie these logs end to end, and I'd row them home, and my grandmother would call friends of hers up and say, "Do you see Daddy out there anywhere?" "Yeah, he looks like he's got 3 logs in tow."
So now we know how the Deadwood collection started.
Yeah, so that's why I've never hurt my back.
Right. Always looking up.
I've always look up when you come up. That's what you do.
You told me that today, and I was like, I gotta try that.
It works.
Oh, it's all the difference.
But it makes sense.
It makes these do everything.
Right.
And you're limited by these then.
Yeah.
Because your back usually can lift more than your legs can because you just don't do squats.
Right.
I mean, who does enough squats to give you big quads, you know?
Right. Right.
But when you think about it, those guys, those weightlifters are not praying when they're down there.
Right.
They're in the right position because they want these to do it all so that they'll have what's left for this.
Now let's go get some Deadwood.
Yeah. Anyhow, it's so I just grew up really strong.
That would do it.
And I was always collecting interesting gnarly driftwood because my grandfather had some driftwood walkways.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was getting seeped in deadwood. And I was always curious about big logs. I mean, our beaches here were festooned with logs because of the early logging was all water transport. Right?
Right and down the river.
And plus there was this natural stuff. I mean, Puget Sound is this huge waterway with cliffs and things and logs and driftwood, and there's hardly any of it around anymore because people have done magic, you know. But there was when I was a kid, and so I'd collect driftwood and big logs. Most of these logs were they're called boomsticks. Well, you probably remember they're the lasso around the logs,
right?
And they're 80 feet long, with holes in them for the boom chains to hold them together, and they'd fill them full of logs and tow them with a tugboat to the sawmill. And those logs, that once the end pulled out, they'd set them free. That's what I'd collect for firewood.
Wow.
And there's a picture in my book of me on the beach with a splitting maul and a big hammer, and those logs were stuff that I had cut up, and
Then did that lead you to more like going into the mountains and like collecting trees? Or
well,
when did
no.
that start?
But when I started, I went through forestry at the University of Washington.
Okay.
Because I knew I was going to be a tree guy, and I pruned all the big fir trees on my grandfather's property. So I climbed them and limbed them because I'm interested in producing good lumber.
Right.
Which
money
was
too.
more than gnarly things. The only gnarly things were the apple trees. And I started in forestry in 1957. I graduated from high school in Chicago. I was living in Chicago at the time, and went in the summer to work Forest Service in Eastern Oregon, down near John Day. So I worked in the Malheur National Forest all summer and was on a fire lookout for a month. And did all that kind of stuff, you know.
That's beautiful territory out there.
Yeah. And I remember once a week I could take time off up there to go down to get fresh water from a spring that was down in a area of the Strawberry Mountains. And it was an area where game crossed. It was kind of a saddle. And there were a lot of obsidian points and stuff in there from Indian hunting early on in that country. Anyhow, I know that there were gnarly trees, and I never noticed them because it was all about timber. And for a while, I was working on the crew pruning ponderosas for timber production. So we were taking limbs off up to 22 feet with long-handled saws. And so trees, but nothing gnarly. And then I started in forestry, and I had an uncle who was in the landscape business. And he worked for this nursery out the north end and he knew I was a tree kind of guy. I knew about trees, and so I had a 41 Plymouth that had a big trunk in the back, a 4-door 41 Plymouth, and I took the back seat out, and with that door up, it was like a pickup truck inside.
Right.
And I would go up in the mountains and collect trees for landscaping. And so I began looking for interesting, mostly vine maples and stuff like that, because you can move them bare root.
Right.
And this one day I was up above the Skokomish River down here, out of Shelton, and I was up in this area digging these clumps, which were real vertical. Spreading ones were a pain in the ass, because how you got to haul them in the back of a thing. And so these vertical ones, I could just kind of stuff several of them in, and I'd haul them to the nursery and sell them. And I paid my way through college doing this kind of stuff. I worked nights at the university bookstore. I was a janitor. And then I only had morning classes because I didn't want to go to school very much. So I took 3, 5-hour classes or whatever they were. And then I was off, and so I could go out and earn money some way. And I was up there digging these trees and carrying them down kind of a game trail to where I was parked. And in a wider area, I saw these gnarly trees real close to the ground. And I remember going over and realizing they were vine maple that had been deer browsed. And remember saying to myself, that's what those Japanese guys put in the pots.
When did you first see a bonsai tree?
I don't know.
Gotcha.
But obviously I had seen
some recollection somewhere, right?
Something of them. And so I started collecting deer browse vine maples. And then I remember one day I decided to go east of the mountains, look for ponderosa pine. And I went over towards Clay Elm across Snoqualmie Pass and found some of those along a railroad grade over there that were kind of contorted but neat bark. And so all of this I just kind of did on my own. And so it became an equal devotion. Stuff for landscaping and little trees, and there weren't any pots, but I at St. Vincent de Paul they had these the stands that held up hot water tanks, 3-legged things with a crescent-shaped tray, and you'd get them for $1 or something because they were just kind of junk. And I still have one of them out here. You'll see tomorrow. And on one corner is one of those old things that I got way back in 57 or 58.
So Dan, I noticed you like words. You like to
I'm kind of
play with the words. What
kind of a punster.
I like that. What from what I always has heard about you before I met you until today, since today I met you, Dan's always gnarly. What brought on the concept for you to as a gnarly thing? Gnarly is such a
because it's such a common word, rather than talking about the undulated structure that twists through the system. And, it's gnarly. The trouble is that for a lot of people, gnarly doesn't compute into a plant form.
Right.
So it's a bit of a misnomer.
Right.
But I still like it.
Right.
And of course my book,
we
use that because
Gnarly Branches.
that just kind of is what really to me makes a thing just be new. What is common in bonsai is, in a way, this flawless, composed, artistic, mature tree.
Right.
But not an ancient one. Almost none of them are ancient looking. And ancient means it's on its way out. And nobody deliberately does that, with the exception of the junipers.
Right. The carving.
And of course, they're flush with these heads of foliage.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and I
The
like
interplay.
them. But at least it's got the dead wood that's
Right.
interesting, but it's replete in nature on all ancient trees. And that's was always my perception. Whether it's you're in Kentucky and you're driving past a great horse farm with black fences, and here's this mound in the middle of this field where they pushed all the rocks, and here's this gnarly tree up there.
Well, a big old oak.
And I didn't see the horses, but I saw that tree. You know, and so, and the tops of trees. I've always been mesmerized by that finishing touch. And on ancient trees, it's a dilapidated presentation because it's on its way out.
Right.
And that's more mysterious for me horticulturally. And I like to think that it is more seductive as a curiosity for new people.
Right.
To conceptualize that this tree is on its way out and you're perpetuating it, and it's lost a whole bunch of its structure and it still is functioning. And I've got some of those. Well, I showed you that one where the bark is coming back, growing into the inside of a hollowed out trunk.
I've never seen that before.
Hello, Earth. Yeah. and of course that the cedar, where the whole trunk is rotted away and it's just cambium layers going down.
Oh yeah,
where the tree has collapsed, it's in the green.
Yeah.
Where the tree is collapsed and pendant.
It's
because
like
there's no structure left. Just strips of bark. I'll show you that one.
Yeah, please.
Hanging on in one piece.
And so it's those kinds of things that just make me just, God, look at that. I mean, I've seen beautiful trees. I know what they look like. I'm a tree guy.
Right.
My whole life, whether I'm pruning them, training them, planting them in landscapes, it's all about a certain level of vigor and health and beauty. But the ones that are just beyond belief are the ones that, to me, are worthy of presenting as a fabulous bonsai kind of a thing, almost like that redwood.
Right.
See, that redwood is borderline getting to look that way, where, God, it's all hollow.
Yeah.
And now we've opened up these openings where you can see through the trunk, and yet here's this flourish. Just so there isn't too much flourish. And that's the problem.
Right.
Fertilizing and watering every other day and all this just makes them way too happy. But maybe with a changing climate, that will diminish. What does help diminish it is the absence of a youthful, viable root system. So don't do that. Don't root prune them every 3 years, 5 years. You don't need vitality. But to educate people that they don't need vitality when they're faced with this little goddammit that they started with. I want to grow into a big tree. Well,
they need vitality.
Okay, put it in the ground. Grow it to where it's ample and then slow it way down and let it just fester along like a tree growing in a crack in the rocks. And that's the way nature has always done it, you know. So it's I know it's heresy.
Well, I was gonna say,
but I'm old enough to just ignore any of those kinds of threats, you know.
That's interesting, yeah, because in the idea I have of like a tree, you know, like I said this morning or this afternoon, I grew up camping on the Oregon coast.
Yeah.
So my understanding of trees is very much a coastal landscape.
Yeah.
You know, and I grew up in playing in forests in my hometown.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting, the idea is that, like, you know, being in Oregon, similar to
Yeah.
Washington, but different bodies of water, different bodies of land.
Yeah, but
Geographically too. It's just with this ancient perception or this idea of gnarliness. Do you feel that's also how you live your life in regards to just pushing myself to the limit and surviving all these things I put myself through?
well, I think so on some level. The one thing that I don't ever want to cut myself short of what I like. I really like chocolate covered raisins.
Right. Those are dessert tonight.
Yeah.
They're great.
And I don't smoke.
Mm.
I don't drink.
Mm.
I don't drink coffee.
Mm.
I don't drink tea.
Mm.
But I eat a lot of fruit
Mm.
and stuff that may be good for me.
Mm.
But I eat about it. I love cowboy cookies. And they're good for me because an attitude preempts the health. Okay?
Yeah.
It's preemptory.
Mm.
If you're feeling really good, you win.
It's like that positive mental attitude.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that kind of drives me on some level. I find myself as I'm getting to be old that I have little patience for doing something that I don't want to do.
Right.
And I think that it's tough because I've got this great lady and she's got things she wants to do. And so there's this concessions and battles.
The 50-50.
All those. kind of, we both agree we love to go to Maui
Right.
and lay in the sun.
Right.
And I like to go because I collect bougainvillea trunks. And then I can ship them home as carving blanks.
Right.
And come back with just this stick.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be in bloom in 6 months. And so that's fabulous.
Right.
You saw that bougainvillea down here.
Yeah, I was like, that's beautiful.
Just find a big old trunk and cut everything off. Rest everything, just bring back the wood. It works. So, anyhow, but I work really best from a creative standpoint by myself.
Mm. Would you consider yourself like a maverick in the sense of just doing it myself because I know I can get it done?
Well, I don't think that,
That's
maverick
debatable.
just sounds like you're deliberately doing something just to be different. I mean, this
Right.
is what my motivation is. So
Right.
I don't treat it as if it's, okay, I'm setting this example
Right.
for people, but I suspect it is because it's educational for people.
Mm.
There's just this dearth of my kind of particular information out there, it seems like. Now, I have no idea because I don't do any of the things you guys do with these goddammits. I mean, you saw that phone I've got.
Right. I wish I could.
And
go
I
back
can
to
actually
that.
make a call
Yeah.
and I can receive them.
Right. That's perfect.
And
Because you know what
anything,
kind of folks
and it probably
these-
could do a lot more, but I have little curiosity about
Right.
all of that. And,
Well, you have how many trees at your nursery?
well, there's probably 350 down
See,
there.
you have a perfect phone for all the trees you have.
Yeah, and then I've
No
got a bunch
distractions,
around
only
here,
trees.
and they're just everywhere.
Right.
And a guy like Anthony shows up in the mix year and a half or 2 years ago, and just this font of a great mind that has all this ability to do a whole bunch of stuff that I have no curiosity about, but all of it is just wonderful stuff.
Right.
He's good with electricity, and the interesting thing is I built that house and did a whole bunch of this stuff, but I didn't know anything about it, but I know enough that I didn't cause any trouble, right? And then I get other people and coming in. Everybody has these contributions, and all of them are much better equipped for a whole bunch of this worldly world that we're in now with the technology.
Everything's connected. Yeah.
My enthusiasm for embellishing the Elandan Gardens thing is unlimited, but I don't want to have to do any of it. I want to prune that tree.
Right. That's what.
Because no one does it better. Now, someone may wire better, but put the branch in the right place. And then I'd probably
for your taste, yeah.
I'd do that. It's just like your carving is really fine. The problem is, and it has to do with bits, is your exterior texture stinks. You don't have any neat, contiguous grooves that can exaggerate the fluctuation in the line. And that has to do with better little burrs that will leave a nice groove with sharp edges. So you've got the basic shape and the hollows. How do I make this outside look good?
Right.
Well, somebody would burn it, but then you'd lose all of that.
Texture,
you really got to go over it again, but it's green wood, and green wood never carves as good as dry wood, and so you're SOL.
Yeah.
For a while.
For a little while.
Right.
For a while. And, it's going to be like the wiring. The frustration for me in the wiring of that redwood was that cut had tips which are unbelievably flimsy. Where even with that little miniature wire, it's just floppy. How am I going to get this wire on there to control the distal end of those branches? Because in logic, the end of the branch is the gnarliest. That's the gnarliest part of the tree, because, do you know why?
It's the most susceptible to the environment?
No, because it's the furthest from the water source.
Right. Yep.
So it's brand new, and it's the oldest part of the tree. Now, work that out as a...
I was going to say
that's more of a condom than a condominium, or a conundrum.
Yeah, I got you.
More of a condom than a condominium. Well, anyhow.
I got you.
Yeah. But, anyhow, it's just a fabulous art form.
It is.
And I can just lose myself in it, and I have for years. Without equivocation and without apologizing, and I've even been able to prune for people all summer long and work on trees, and
with the garden itself, how did you come up with, for one, the setup, and two, the name? How did you decide to?
My wife
this way?
saw that picture of me. See that the one picture down there. I'm in the first picture. I'm just a little figure next to a tree down there.
It might be in the book.
The big overall.
Well, my wife saw me leaning on a shovel in the middle of this 8-acre chunk of land with no trees or anything, and she said, he's either nuts or he has great elan. And then she said, Elandan.
Okay.
And elan is a French word meaning spirit or bravery or urge or power or some kind of a thing.
Your energy.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
So it's this Will Hiltz. There's that picture of me cutting wood.
Yeah. Where? Oh yeah. I'm trying to see if there's a picture of the garden, like the early stages here.
I don't know if it's in there.
Anyhow,
it's down there in that row of pictures on the counter.
With the design that you put in, how did that come about?
It's all spontaneous.
It is? Okay.
It's got to be, and that's the same thing with bonsai.
Right.
We were talking about that the other day, that spontaneity is the gateway to creativity. It's it. The plan is the enemy.
Right.
Because then you are assaulted with all of your cumulative knowledge.
I didn't think about that.
And the trouble with that is that you've got all of this visual history of other people's trees and how they should look.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Which is hard to discount that. It's like so many things that I talk about. It's discounting all of this educational stuff that you've gone through.
Right.
Because it's wrong.
Like we're conditioned.
Yeah. And so everything turns out safe.
Right.
And mediocre.
Yeah. Almost the same looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all the same. Everything's a triangle. And you count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's your tree design.
Hello,
Earth.
What's your opinion on Pinjing in that way of like the
It's
origination?
neat. Yeah. Chinese are much freer than, of course, Pinjing for them really had to do more with stone and trees, but they use it to describe the Chinese style. And I always thought that the most interesting story that I ever heard, and I don't know whether I'm the only person who ever heard it, but that the origin of bonsai was from India, and it was a function of the traveling shaman, the medicine doctors, who traveled from town to town, serving as medicine men to the ill and infirm.
Right.
That's a guess. Who else? And they needed live product. And so they had little plants that would bear product so that it was good. And one of those magical trees is the neem tree.
Oh, okay.
Which is has medicinal properties. I don't know if any of them are applicable to human health.
Right.
But who knows?
Right. Shamans are shamans.
But they had little trees. So it was all a functional thing. But they kept them small because they were going with donkeys or camels or whatever you travel around with in India.
Right.
Or a car.
Elephants.
Now,
a boat, I don't know. Sampan. Some kind of a thing. And
I never heard that story. Had you heard that?
I think I've heard a few different guesses, and that's one of the guesses about how it might have originated.
Yeah, from there it evolved up into China.
Right.
And then to Korea, and then on to Japan. And
you were in Korea, yeah?
Yeah.
What were you?
Well, I got drafted.
Okay. Right. With your time in Korea, did you do any bonsai there? Did you
Yeah.
see any, or?
Yeah, so in the late 50s, I was starting to collect some trees. And I was working with my uncle in landscaping. So there were some excellent landscape designers in Seattle that were doing things that looked just like what I saw in the mountains. A guy named Jim Kelly. He used snags, dead wood in the gardens, and rocks, and gnarly trees. So it was akin to a Japanese kind of a feeling, but with a northwest bent, because there's dead wood.
Right.
And they never saw that in Japan. It's always a fuel.
Very
Anything
clean.
dead, you burn it for heat.
Yeah.
And but you do see it in China. Dead wood being used and honored. Anyhow, so I was starting with some bonsai, and of course I was subject to the draft because I was reaching, at 18 you had to register. And then I quit school in 61, and then they got after me to draft me, and then they didn't draft me because I had played basketball in high school in Chicago on a team that was sponsored by the Labor Youth League, and it turned out to be a subversive organization on the Attorney General's list, and so since I'd played basketball on the team,
You're blacklisted.
I had to be investigated for 2 years, and so they investigated me for 2 years.
Wow.
And since I was a risk, they drafted me anyhow. And then they turned me into a water purification specialist, so I was in charge of the drinking supply.
Okay.
So the water. So in the wisdom of the the force, they made me in charge of the army. Anyhow, so I got drafted, and in 62 or something like that, and I got trained. They wanted me to go OCS because I'd had 5 years at college, but I wasn't about to become an officer or do any of that. So they put me into drafting, and then they turned me into a water purification specialist. And then they sent me to Korea for a 2-year haul over there. And the mountains, I was in Daegu, which is south central. So it's right in the middle, but it's down, and it's a little town out in the country. It has a railroad station, a big railroad building along the, whatever that's called, People would go to catch the train, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody was ox carts and very primitive. And we had a military base there, and I don't know what we did, but we were just there. And there was an isolated post that was relying on this base that was up in the mountains there, a degaussing station, which I never did get to find out what that is. But somehow they got rid of the gauss up there, whatever the gauss was. But the mountains were festooned with pines, and all of them were gnarly. And I'll never forget when we flew into Korea, and I took the train down to Daegu, and we're driving through this countryside, and I'm looking out the window, and every tree was gnarly. And I just couldn't believe it because I was collecting up those for landscaping.
You're salivating. You're like, I want my hands
not so
on
much
those.
for bonsai, but
You
for
already
landscaping,
started.
because they were all,
Right.
and there was no such thing as a straight one. There just weren't any straight ones. They were all like this, and you come to a forest and all the red pines. Most of them were red pines. There weren't a lot of black pines.
I'm like, don't go to Ohio. You'll almost
Right.
stick straight.
But they were all crooked. And it's kind of interesting because genetically, the same thing was true from the Scots pines from Norway or Northern Europe anyhow. And the first ones that they brought over here and planted in plantations all were crooked at first. So it was a genetic quality, and then they grew out of it because they're such a good place to grow. And I remember seeing that back when I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and in Chicago, that a lot of the Scots pines had this interesting character at first, and then they grew straight. Like they
stick
said,
straight.
"Oh, this is the good life." Oh, that's
More
straighten up.
photosynthesis.
So anyhow, there were lots of crooked trees, and I was up in those mountains probably the day after I got there, right out of our billets where we would sleep. I mean, you could walk out the back door, and the mountains were right there, and they were just festooned with rock and wonderful plants. Selaginellas. Selaginella is a type of primitive fern. It's like a club moss or something like that. But these were on stems.
Wow.
And so they look like little palm trees.
Yeah.
Then they dry up to a knot.
Huh.
A resurrection plant.
Huh.
You may have seen them as a resurrection plant. They used to sell them in packaging. You put them in water and they unfurl like little ferns.
Right.
And these were everywhere. And I remember going up there at first, not knowing anything about them, and just seeing these things sticking up with these knots on the top. And, they're just, you could pick up a pad of them off of a big rock. And I thought, what the hell are these? Oh. And then I went up there after a rain, and here's this flora abunda kind of presentation, and the gnarly pines, and it was fabulous. And in the town there was one guy who had in the window of his shop some interesting Chinese artifacts, bronze things, which I bought a couple of those. So I was old enough to appreciate antiquities, lots of Silla Dynasty stuff. I was in charge of the water supply for the camp, and of course you had Korean nationals that did all the work, so I didn't really have anything to do. They'd been doing it for years, and so I could just kind of do what I wanted. And so I had this friend who was a Korean guy, and he captured my interest in antiques, and so he was always bringing me boxes of stuff from people out in the village.
Oh wow!
So it's almost no money.
Right.
I'm making money, but where are you going to spend it? Anyhow, just had a good time.
Yeah.
And so I had this guy who was bringing me these antiquities, knew about my passion for trees, because I had bought a tree from a guy downtown that had a really neat pine. It was a cascading black pine in a beautiful pot, and $250 or some nominal thing, and I had that there. And then he had heard that there was this old guy out in one of the rural areas out in the country that was a bonsai collector.
Wow.
And so we made, I had a Jeep at my disposal. And so one afternoon we drove out and this country was just all rice paddies with dirt paths around and mountains right there. And we drove out to this place, and then we walked along this network of trails to this hooch, which was his house, and he wasn't there. But his wife was there, and of course this guy could speak Korean. He said, well, he's up in the mountains collecting trees, but he should be coming back because the sun was going down or something like that. So you got to picture this thing. Here's this neophyte, me, out there in a rice paddy, and the oriental sun is going down in the west behind these mountains, so there's this gold light kind of shining, and you see this figure walking along with this backpack, and these guys had these backpacks that were maybe 6 or 7 foot high things this big, fastened here with 2 branches left on them.
Oh, wow.
Out the back.
Huh.
And these guys would collect wood, and they'd have these huge loads going way up over their heads with this thing on their back, and they could just bend their knees a little bit, and those legs would take the load off, and they'd put a stick here, and they could walk out from under it, and here was this, because they gathered all their fuel out of the woods, so there weren't any branches on these trees, they just all had trunks going up.
Oh, wow.
Because it was all fuel.
Right.
And he had this backpack on, and here was his bonsai tree over his head as he walked along this thing, and he had one of these. He was this old guy.
Oh, really? Old long beard?
You know? It's just the real world, you know, for a fledgling bonsai enthusiast who really hadn't had any connecting here.
Right.
Because I was living here when I was collecting trees in the mountains and doing some stuff.
And on your own, yeah.
And so we went into his backyard, and here was this forest of pines, and he was using iron wire.
Wow.
And just junk stuff.
Right.
And a lot of these pines, like the one he had, was quite rangy. Kind of like yours, only much more so, you know, branches this long.
The ponderosa.
And he he wound up compressing that down with this wire. Underneath it was just this nightmare of big wire and poles, all this stuff to compress it down to these pads.
Right.
So they just looked sensational. And many of them had nishiki bark. So I was the first person to ever really see the nishiki red pines from Korea.
Right.
And I wrote about it at some point, and then finally some Japanese guys heard about it, and in the late 60s started going to Japan. Started going to Korea to try to find some of these thick bark, red pines, densifloras. And anyhow, so I've got one that I got from this guy. Or no, I didn't get this. This is one I collected, but I bought several of them from him, and I had them, and I had a permit to bring them in, even though they were hard pines. And it was illegal from Japan, but it was okay from Korea. But the problem is I had to ship them by boat.
Oh, no.
And how are you going to do it?
Right.
And so I hadn't figured out how I was going to do it, but I was going to try to crate them and do it in the fall. And have an auxiliary water supply somehow that would give a slow drip.
Right.
And maybe some batteries to give them a little extra light.
Right.
I tried to figure out how trees, I was thinking about here with the heavy snow loading, is there any light under 10 feet of snow?
Right.
You know, do trees survive in the dark for
Right.
3 months on a boat?
Right.
Without any light on the foliage? I just didn't know, you know, but I was going to give it a try. And then I got shipped out on emergency leave. And so I brought one tree and a bunch of seeds. And left all that other stuff there at the water point. So those guys had these bonsai trees. God only knows, but it was just fabulous.
You still have the tree that you brought over?
Yeah. It's on the floor in the store. Right behind where you've been standing there. We'll lift it up. I planted it on a rock about 6 years ago. It's just a wonderful, wonderful tree.
And all the seeds you brought back, you still have.
Well, that's what all the pines are.
Okay, the landscape. Okay.
Yeah. So I planted those in 62 or 63 or something.
So when did you open the nursery? What year?
In 73. We opened in 74. We got on the land.
Okay.
And we cleared it. And then we collected stuff for nearly a year because we were looking for dirt. There was no dirt.
Where did you find it at?
6 inches of dirt, and then you're into cans and bottles.
Right.
Okay,
you said it was
so-
an old dump, right?
Yeah. So we finally, in the fall of the first year of 73, we got a line and bought 35,000 yards of dirt for $1 a yard delivered because they had to get rid of it.
I was going to say, yeah.
You know, that's the thing. You can always buy dirt, but,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't have any money to do this whole
Right.
thing.
Did you say?
We put the buildings up,
didn't
which
you
were
say-
greenhouse buildings because they're inexpensive. And so
Right.
we're still kind of fighting that, but
Right.
they've worked. And
Right.
we built that addition that where you're working over there. And so it's kind of shaky, but it's lasted for 30 years.
Right.
And so,
You know,
and it's quite quaint.
high tides, a little.
Yeah.
little
Gravel floor and kind of drips. And
Right.
But
Only natural.
life goes on. Yeah.
Dan, didn't you say at some point that a lot of the dirt that you trucked in came from some kind of a landslide nearby or something?
Well, yeah, we got, ultimately, we hauled in several 100,000 yards. That whole hill in between us and the highway, that was a hole. It dropped down from the highway 30 feet deep out there where Williams Building is and everything. But initially, I just wanted the dirt for the bonsai garden. So we hauled in all of that initial stuff so that we could build the garden, so that I could build the garden.
So
You know.
I'm trying to piece
And
this.
so while we were waiting for the dirt the first year, what we did buy right away we opened in the fall of 94. So the first year we collected stuff, but what I did in the fall in anticipation of getting the permit, so it took us a couple of years to get the permit for the property.
From the city, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
because it was in a wildlife preserve
Okay.
and it's a garbage dump.
Right.
And the only
Kind of
proviso you had to, the proviso was that if you're going to do something, it had to have to do with gardening and or education. So that wound up easy. But so we bought a boom truck
Okay.
because to lift anything, you got to have a boom truck.
Right.
So we bought a boom truck at an auction for $12,000 or something like that. And that truck lifted rocks and logs, and every
Got your money
weekend we'd go down to the ocean, near the ocean, in the woods down there, to collect cedar chunks, logs, and root things, all of that gnarly stuff you see in the garden. And all during the week, William was going to school. And during the week, I'd use the boom truck and go out and logging areas and collect rocks. Big rocks. So I had this huge inventory of my kind of product of logs and rocks. All I needed was the dirt. So we're waiting for the dirt. And finally, this construction job came up in Port Orchard where we're going to haul out 35,000 yards of dirt, and we'll deliver it for $1 a yard. And so they truckload after truck, 350 truckloads came in there. And we just built mounds, and William got done with school in November.
This was what year?
In 73.
Okay.
Yeah, we got on the land in 73. We opened in 74. So he got done with his school in November or December of 73. And we started composing the garden. And so we just started way out at the far end, and we had these piles of dirt around, and we had a backhoe for a while and some lesser equipment, but it was all, I'd been there when they were hauling the dirt in, so I knew that we wanted to have a big canyon over there, and the big pond was kind of an afterthought, but I didn't put any dirt there. I knew I was going to have a pond, but it didn't develop the way I wanted it to. It's only kind of partially done, but it's really quite fabulous. And it's all about the ingredients. So there's a lot of big logs and big rock
Right. Right. As you said. Yeah.
and mounds.
Yeah.
And that's all you really need.
Mm.
And you can really just do it with mounds and bark. But at least have elevational changes and have surprises.
Right.
So every
right.
corner
Yeah.
is a new vista.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's flat, it's self-defining. It's
Mm.
real flat.
So I'm trying to connect the dots here. So, okay, so you used to find dead wood, bring it over, cut it up, had that approach with the apple trees.
Grandfathers,
you know, and then you're going to school.
But I'm
forestry
finding
and-
interesting gnarly wood,
Yeah, yeah,
being
And
infatuated with that on some level.
right. And then
But that's
collecting the
much,
stuff.
that's 15 years earlier. That's,
right. And then you go to Korea and have that influence of like, wow, this is what I've wanted.
Yeah, but I was
Go
already
back.
involved going over there
Right,
with
right.
bonsai, but this is kind of, wow, here's the real
Right.
McCoy, and he had one of these,
Right.
for God's sake.
It's
I
the
mean,
real deal.
what else is there?
And then you come back. What prompted you to want to open a bonsai nursery?
Well, I didn't.
Okay.
And I didn't do that then.
It took a while.
Okay.
I just came back and went more into the landscape business.
Okay.
I mean, this is the early 60s.
Right. Right.
We didn't start Elandan until
90,
93.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
30 years later. I guess.
50 years later, or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And so I was a landscaper and a tree pruning guy
Right.
from the early 60s until Elandan Gardens in 93.
Mm.
So yeah, like I say, 30 years.
And when did you get on at the fire department?
In 67 or 68.
So you
So I was a landscaper,
Mhm.
and I did a landscaping job for a captain on the fire department.
Hmm.
And he said, you ought to become a fireman.
Hmm.
You can still do landscaping because you work one day and you're off too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 24 or 48, you're working. And so I said, hey, yeah. And so in the fall, I took the test to
Hmm.
become a fireman. And of course came out first because I've always been really fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. that's a big
But
test.
I was 28 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. And simultaneous with that, I met this lady
Ah. Okay.
on the beach.
Right. As you said.
And so there weren't any surprises, but it was quite nice.
Mm.
And so 3 months after we got married, I became a fireman.
Mm.
And then that just kind of, okay. So it's all about landscaping jobs, firefighting, which is not, you just kind of do that.
Right. Right.
Working on trees on duty
Mm. In the
because
firehouse.
it's a hobby.
Yeah.
And off days, well, I'll go up in the mountains and see what I can find. And then we started having kids.
Go and go and go.
3 years later or something like that. And that didn't change too much, but after a while I took them up in the mountains with me.
Right. Right.
And so they all became tree collecting kind of kids
Would they point them out
during the week
Mm.
when nobody's up there.
Mm.
See, so I went
yeah.
saddled into weekends when everybody else is
Right.
wherever they are.
Right.
But this is open country, so that you can still find open spaces, even though you do it on weekends. And so most of the time I was up in the Cascades here. And if I came up with 1 or 2 good trees a year, that was a bunch. And so the collection grew because nothing ever died
Right.
because I never root them.
What's the?
I
What would you
didn't
say
start
the-
losing trees until I started learning about bonsai.
Something too. What would you say is the longest, the tree that's the longest in the pot in your garden right now?
Oh, I've got some from 57.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I've got one right out here.
That's the thing that blows
I
my
got
mind. It goes
one out
against
here.
everything I've ever been told.
There's one I grew from a seed that I collected in my freshman year in college. And we were out in a class called dendrology,
Mm-hmm.
and it was conifers.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking at a Port Orford cedar in the parking lot at the University of Washington,
Mhm.
and it had seeds on there. And I grabbed some of those little cones and took them to my grandmother's house, who I was living with my freshman year, which was in the U District up in Seattle, and she put them in a pot on our kitchen window. And 3 little Port Orford cedars grew up there, and I still have one of those out here in a bonsai pot. I'll show it to you. It's right outside.
Yeah.
And now that wasn't really my first bonsai. That was just a seedling.
Right.
But I bought a tree from the nursery that my uncle had. Remember, my uncle Bud was the landscaper, and so I was collecting trees in the mountains and selling them to that nursery, and sometimes helping him with some landscaping jobs.
Right.
And just being very cognizant of special landscapers in Seattle, this Ken Kelly guy.
Yeah.
Because he was using dead wood and things looked very natural, like what I see in the mountains.
Right.
And I just had this affinity for that. Probably because as a kid, I spent all this time on the beaches collecting driftwood and gnarly stuff. And
Coming
so,
full circle.
as a matter of fact, on one of the islands up there, and I'll never forget it, there was this vertical cliff on the end of this island, and there was a cascading Douglas fir that hung down that cliff and then spread out 40 feet above the beach, and that beautiful cascade. And I remember every time later on, I finally got a motor when I was 14, so I never rode again, but I was quite strong by that time.
Right.
And every time I'd go past, I just marvel at that. Look at that thing, even before I was involved with bonsai.
Right. It just
And so this was,
takes it back.
look at that shape of that tree.
Yeah.
That's really something. And then I remember somebody built a house and they cut it off. And
Oh, man.
it's still on the beach, crumpled
Right.
at the base of the cliff. And I thought, it's like this giant cedar that was down here.
Yeah.
Suddenly people come, and people are just the ruination.
Oh, it's like the one you said with the really gaudy houses where they felled the tree and they eventually cut it down.
Yeah, that's what we were just saying down there.
Yeah.
The 1,000-year-old cedar, or 6 foot wide one.
Yeah, just it would fill this space here.
Mm-hmm.
It went up to this dead snag top that went straight up.
Right.
And leaning away from the house, no danger to anything, and it's been there forever, so it isn't going to fall down.
Right.
And,
And it's natural habitat.
Oh, yeah, let's cut that down and keep the maples. I mean, you remember there were all these maples around, and I said, if I lived here, these maples would be gone.
They did the opposite.
So they cut the tree down and leave the
They
maples.
heard you.
Yeah.
They heard you. Let's piss them off.
No, you guys got it all wrong.
So then, going back to when you were doing your trees and working on them and styling them the way you wanted, how did you go about doing events and things? Because there's I've seen pictures of you events like
demonstration.
Well,
I saw photos of that, but when did that
okay,
start?
so in the there was a bonsai. Every time I'd go out to my uncle's nursery, which was out in North Seattle, I'd go past this greenhouse building, and I could see bonsais through the window. And finally I stopped one time and got up closer and looked through the window. Never went in. Some Japanese guy in there. It just seemed like, well, look, there's little trees in there, gnarly little trees. He wasn't selling them. It was just his own collection or something. It was a floral kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so that, there's somebody doing that. And probably about, I don't think it was after, it was almost until 1965 or 66 that I stopped at that nursery because there was a white guy inside, and I went in, and it was Dr. Bruner.
Oh.
Was in there. Now, he was the precursor to bonsai in Seattle, probably from the white man's standpoint, and he was a member of a club called the Bonsai Bums, which were all doctors.
Oh, wow.
And there was one lady in the club named Connie Raphael, and they would meet maybe once a month at one or another's house, and he was very avid about bonsai. He was a dermatologist, but an old guy, and he was in there, and so I met him, and we just kind of talked, and I didn't. Told him, yeah, I've got quite a few trees. I've been collecting them in the mountains. And I like the old stuff,
Like, where have you
He's
been?
just kind of
Where have you been all my life?
because he had always gone to arboretum plant sales, bought little plants, and taken them to his property out down here ways, and planted them in the ground, and trained them in the ground. He'd dig them up on Sunday, and take some into town because he lived on Queen Anne in Seattle. And he'd work on the tree, and then he'd take them back and plant them in the ground. And this was his modus operandi. And there was this club that they met, and this Japanese guy in that thing was the sensei, Kelly Nishitani. And so I kind of met him there. And then I had an aunt who lived over in West Seattle. And we went to dinner at her house or something, and 2 neighbors away was a guy with some bonsais in his yard. And I guess maybe he was out in his yard, a guy named Willard Livingston. And I talked to him, and he was a member of that Bonsai Bums.
Oh, wow.
And he said, well, why don't I'll pick you up at the ferry. You can bring one of your trees and come to the meeting. There's one in a week or so. And I think this actually happened after I married. Well, I got married in 1967. So, so I went for 7 years after this Korean thing. Now all my seeds were growing, and I'm training them into kind of bonsais, and I'm living out in the country down there, and people would come by, and occasionally someone would stop in who was a bonsai kind of person. So I had some contact, but no real connection with anybody. And so anyhow, I took one of my, I had some Arctostaphylos media. That's the, what the hell is it? It's the manzanita.
Oh, yeah.
With a trunk about this big.
Yeah.
That looked like a miniature madrone.
Oh, wow.
With red berries on it. Just a fabulous thing.
Right.
Took that on the ferry, carried it on the boat.
You probably got so many looks. You're like, what is this guy doing?
And he met me coming off the ferry and took me to this meeting. It was at Lee Bouchot's house. I'll never forget it. It was up near Green Lake. And, I walk in here, all these old fogey old doctors and stuff. I come in with this, and they'd never seen anything like it.
Agape.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
Saliva everywhere, it got slippery on the floor. It's terrible. And
oh, my.
So that was great fun. So I became the Cub member of the Bonsai Bums. Well, simultaneous. So we had some club meetings, and we actually talked about some stuff and started conceptualizing about developing the Puget Sound Bonsai Society to bring together these disparate small clubs into a bigger union. And so that would have been in 67 or 68, like I said. In 69, we had a big bonsai show up at the Art Museum in downtown Seattle, up in Volunteer Park, in the museum. It was just quite fabulous. And it was the Bonsai Bums and the Japanese men's group and the Marimaki group. Everybody was, and so it was this great show. And of course, I was excited because all of my early time, I felt this was going to be an art that was going to just sweep the world, because it was so fabulous.
Right.
It's like you.
Yeah.
You have this impression also that anything this wonderful, everyone
needs to do it.
is going to be doing it, and that's the way it is. And I'm going to be part of it.
Right.
And I just dreamt about that. And for the next 20 years, that certainly was the case for me, because then I started putting on demonstrations for the local clubs and going in as a club advisor and this kind of stuff, because I had really great trees and I knew what you did, and I tried to learn what you could. So I bought the Brooklyn Botanic books.
Oh yeah.
There's 2 of them.
Was that one
And I remember particularly interested in the information on collecting in the wild. And here was this tiny little chapter. And here's this whole book of all these rules of stuff. And here's this thing on what I cared about.
Right.
And they didn't know anything about it. I mean, I've been doing that for years. What do you mean you do it that way?
Right.
This year you go and cut this root.
Right.
Then next year you cut this one.
Right.
And it's, come on, just do it all at once.
Was that when Yuji was doing at the book?
Yeah, he started in the early 60s.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he moved from, he got booted out of his family's nursery over in Japan and moved to upstate New York. I can't remember the name of the town. Someplace, and started that whole thing. And then Bill Valvenis affiliated with him, and it became classical bonsai.
Right.
With all the concurrent rules.
Right.
And those they invented.
Right.
You know.
And he made his book and everything too.
And all the ladies groups joined, and Yuji would get out there with 2 cigarettes and talk to them about bonsai and bring in his Dwarf Alberta spruce and fart around with it.
So then, when you're doing all these clubs and demonstrations and advising and consulting, if you will,
Yeah.
when did you meet John Naca? Like, how did he come about in this?
Well, when we formed Puget Sound Society,
yeah,
we started inviting guest lecturers.
Okay.
And so John Naca had been very active. It seemed to me that sometime into the late 60s, with Diane being around and me being interested in bonsai, we started doing some traveling to California. And because I needed pots. I had these bottoms off of hot water tanks.
Right.
We had Trident Imports in Seattle that were bringing a few in. That was down on the waterfront, right next to the ye old Curiosity Shop, which you never saw that either. That was this great store right next to the ferry that had all these curiosities, no bonsai. Anyhow, there was this Trident Imports, and they sometimes had a bonsai pot. An actual thing, so. But we went to L.A. Somehow I knew. I guess it was after I met John, because he's the one who told me about Matsuda's. Matsuda was a bonsai pot provider for L.A.
Oh wow!
And had this connection in Japan for those raven gray, beautiful pots and all this stuff. And somehow early on, I went down to John's house and told him that I had to get some bonsai pots. And so he wrote me a letter of introduction to this guy, Matsuda, who had this collection of pots for sale. And this was really something. And it was in the La Brea tar pits area. I don't know if you know anything about LA, but and the La Brea area is where the tar pits are.
Yeah.
And it was a very primitive area then. And this guy had some chicken coops out there. So some of the ground was actually still kind of farmed, maybe.
Yeah.
And this guy had this chicken coop. I'll never forget driving in there. And here was this low house, and I showed him this letter, and he didn't speak hardly any English, and he opened the door, and there were rows of bonsai pots.
Oh, wow.
Your jaw dropping.
As far as you can see, we're just going,
There's a guy.
Yeah, Diane was with me. We'll have to reminisce about that. That was really, really something. Yeah, this guy, Matsuda, and Kobe Trading Company. Look up Kobe Trading Company and see if it still exists. Finally, he died, and then she had a bunch of money, and so she built a nice building for all the pots. Kobe Trading Company, and that would be in what part of LA is that? could drive there, but I can't remember the name. It's been a long time.
Right.
This
Well, a
was
lot
all
has changed geographically.
50 years ago.
With
a name like that, there's got to be a bunch of Kobe training companies.
with the influence in Seattle, especially Seattle, with the Japanese community that was here prior to.
I really had nothing ever to do with it.
Never, okay.
But when we formed Puget Sound Bonsai, there was the men's group.
Right.
But they were all Japanese speaking.
Oh, Japanese only.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And although there was this big Japanese retail store downtown, I never really somehow got involved with it. I mean, if I needed a pot, and I didn't really need many pots because I didn't really have finished trees.
At the time, right? Yeah.
So any kind of pot would do.
Right.
And but anyhow, Kobe Trading Company. So for years I would go down there and buy pots, and then I had pots. So, but we formed Puget Sound Bonsai Society. I think in '71 or something like that. We had that giant big bonsai show in '69 at the art museum, and then everything kind of fulminated into, okay, let's form this society. Of course, I was on the board.
The snowball
Dr.
effects,
Bruner was on the board. Connie Raphael, a lot of people from the men's bonsai group, but all these other groups just kind of dissolved into that.
Okay.
And ultimately, by the mid '80s, we were up to 500 members.
Wow.
It was one of the biggest ones anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And then came cell phones.
You're under.
And now they're lucky to have 100 people in the club.
Like I know Bonsai Society of Portland just hit 500 members.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's crazy, but
There was several people down there that were good in bonsai, and I was affiliated with Tim Boyle, who was an early guy in that club down there. It's really kind of festered along for years, and then with Ryan Neal and Michael Hagedorn and these guys coming in with real training.
Right.
That has done what it's done, which I'm not sure, but I was down there for a club meeting a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, with a guest artist, Larry Jackal, who is the curator of the Botanic Garden in Denver. He came out and did a program, and I drove down and picked him up because he's an old buddy, and we came up here. And so I went to that meeting, and then I've been down there to a couple of shows they've had. They're way out on the southwest side of Portland, and out there in the area. And and then of course there was the big show that Ryan Neal put on down there, which was a fabulous.
I kicked myself because I was living 2 blocks away from that show. Oh wow! And I was into bonsai, but not like I am now, but as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
My girlfriend at the time. My wife now, she's like, hey, you want to go to this thing? Because she was doing her master's degree in Japanese teaching. So they had, I'm like, no, it's cool. It's all right. And then I find out, I was like, wait a minute. But wait a minute.
This is the biggest thing in the world.
In a way. Of all things that I passed.
So.
As of all the reflection that we've done today, it's been a great conversation.
Actually, I learned a lot that I hadn't heard in 5 years volunteering with you still.
Well, I've never really
been asked all
get into a retrospective very much, I mean,
I hope that was all right.
He really never interviewed me for the book.
Oh, really?
It was just stuff he's extrapolated.
How did that book come about?
Yeah, that would be.
Well,
you didn't write it.
I had the garden, and this guy showed up. It turned out he's a psychiatrist.
Okay.
He's been in bonsai for quite a few years. Started in Memphis.
Oh, wow.
Where Brussels is.
Yeah, yeah.
Started with a few nice trees, then moved to New Mexico, where most of them died because it was hot and dry. And but he still kept the passion. And then he moved up here and drove by and saw this sign bonsai and happened in, and we started talking about stuff, and he just wanted to capture my thing.
Yeah, your gnarliness.
Yeah. And he did just a great job. He
Yeah.
did all the photography, about 99% of it.
Beautiful.
Vicky and Eric did some photography stuff, but we went collecting together and all kinds of stuff. So we did the photography and just an unbelievably talented, dedicated guy. And so anyhow, but he left this, to me, it's just a fabulous book, because as much as I wanted to write a book,
it's a lot of work.
It's kind of funny. The only book I ever thought about writing, and this was years ago, the only, as far as I got in the book, was the cover picture. And the name of the book was going to be The Congenital Defect. And on the cover was a guy like Trump in a cowboy outfit with double holsters and big guns. And this was what America is composed of. Because what we all are misfits in this country. We ran away
That's true.
from where we started.
That's the fighting spirit.
Yeah. And you can laud that or abuse it.
Yeah.
But that's what the composition of this country is. And here we're living living in it right now. You know. Anyhow, that was the only book I ever thought I ever wanted to write. I mean, I kind of started to write about my bonsai thing.
Like some articles.
I'd really rather be... Yeah, I did a lot of articles. As I See It was the titles of them. Because it was different than what other people, and I had photographs. And most of this I did at the fire department, because I had the time.
Right.
And I'm locked in.
Right.
But once I'm free, and whether it's pruning for somebody or going up and finding stuff.
In all this time, did you ever journal for yourself? Never?
Yeah, I once asked him if he recorded the dates and when he did certain operations on his trees, and he's like, "Oh, if I did that, I'd spend all my time record keeping and not enough time actually doing bonsai."
Yeah. What is it? I ran into somebody the other day that was so pissed at this lady that he was working for because she was into that.
Oh.
And this was what's most important, is the record keeping. Oh, I guess it's my grandson. He works in the Navy Yard, and he's an atomic energy guy. And there's this lady that is doing the accounting, keeping track of this stuff, and he says, "I just hate her." All she does is get down to tiny little minuscule details of every little movement. Anyhow, no, I never really did any of that kind of stuff other than to write stories about the trees. And so I got a book over here of 50 or so trees that I've written their stories, because the stories are wonderful.
Awesome.
And I would like to get all those new signs, because those new signs are really nice, except that they're so replete with mistakes. You know, the problem is that I write things. I have the round hand. And it's endlessly legible. But nobody writes anymore. And I passed my book off to some young thing who doesn't know what that word is, and it's just totally wrong. She puts it on the sign, and it's just, what's that word? Because she couldn't read the writing, because she doesn't know what writing is. Everything is printed.
It's cursive too.
So, like I said, I have my problems with being an atavism. You know what an atavism is?
I do not.
An inaccurate historical event. That's me. I come from an earlier time when people wrote the round hand.
With all your time in bonsai, what, as far as future for now going forward? You know, you've been through the quarantine, we've survived what we've been to now. We're in 2022. You know, what are the things you're looking forward to with your practice, your career, just with your?
Gosh, I don't really have
any aspirations for anything new.
Nothing great, just working on the material that I've got.
Gotcha.
I've got a whole bunch of stuff down there that I haven't done anything.
I saw the container.
But I'm so disciplined to take care of what I've got.
Right.
And, spending 5 days on that redwood tree,
Right. Right.
I love it.
Right.
But I think about, there's that mountain hemlock out there that
Salivating on getting working.
And working with new material is pretty fabulous, but the way I go about working with the old material is just as good as the new,
Right.
except that it's better
Right.
because it has all of these historical things that I did right.
Yeah.
Great Nabari or great hollow trunk to deal with.
Right.
Whereas a new tree is all, I have to spontaneously figure out how do I impose these features on this so that trunk just consumes the visual appetite.
Right.
I mean, that's the deal. It's all about the trunk
Right.
and that branch pattern
Right.
and seeing it. And so sparsing is huge, and it's the opposite of what they wanted to show.
Right.
Right? So I never do well in judging, right?
Right.
Because it's just too, what the hell is this? Where are the leaves
Right.
on this tree?
Right.
It's like your ghost tree.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so, I just kind of laugh at it because I just don't care.
Right.
I have great visits of people coming to the garden.
Right.
And the most wonderful thing to hear is I've never seen anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the ultimate reward for all of this effort.
Right.
As they've never seen anything like it.
Do you think you have that essence about it because you weren't classically trained like in Japan? You don't have that bloodline of this is my sensei.
Certainly that
way.
plus the experience that I had
Right.
was being just immersed in natural things.
Right.
In
the environment.
From rowing the boat and dragging logs to driftwood to seeing the beaches in their primordial state before we came along and cleaned them all up.
Right. Build houses with them.
And so I think that historical imperative and the way it exudes from me as I'm working on trees and the spontaneous addiction that I have for not planning things
Like
other than having the tools.
Yeah.
Don't draw a picture of it first.
Yeah.
I have this dream of this perfect branch because I had a hemlock once that had this wonderful, wonderful shape that roils in my mind. And so here's this trunk, and here's this branch that leaves the trunk and meanders down and then comes up and goes back over the top of it. And so you see this whole structure with this embrace. And every once in a while I have a long enough branch where I think, hey, I'm going to
try.
Make it
because I had a hemlock that had that branch naturally, and I sold it to a guy, and he was a pet doctor. He died, and I'm wondering how that tree is because I know his wife was devoted to it, but I'll never forget that branch. It's funny how some things just and I've got a great thing to show you down at the garden.
Yeah.
It was on another hemlock tree, and I found this, I don't know why I cut it off, but for some reason it had to come off the tree, but it just is this wonderful deadwood looking thing. It's only this long and this big around, but it has like the shari on the outside, and then it's decayed inside, and then there's a shaft from the hardwood.
That sounds so cool.
Going out, and it's only this big, and I use it as a brace on a branch, so I know right where it is.
Right.
I can walk right to it. So
It's like,
right there, it's holding.
Every time.
It's propping this branch up a little bit on one of my mountain hemlocks out there, but just certain elements just to live in my memory.
Yeah.
And they kind of I don't ever really necessarily use them, but I think about those things, and they're all naturally done.
Right.
Man's handiwork is sensational. I'm looking at that sculpture that's a roof tile, from China.
Oh wow.
And I look
It's
at, it's incredible what those early guys used to do. You just don't see that kind of stuff anymore.
Right.
It's all,
That
it's
craftsmanship.
like modern architecture.
It's box.
It's plain and
Right.
open, and
Soft.
and I'm thinking, well, have a neat tree in here at
Right.
least,
Right. Right.
Have something to look at that's
Opposing
that's
views.
intrinsically beautiful, and you
Yeah.
can consume yourself in the naturalness of it rather than this artifice of. It's kind of like our society with this perversion of the word virtual.
Mm.
Virtual means real.
Mm.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't mean that anymore.
Now it means online.
Online or computer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it like that.
It's just kind of, huh?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Here's this fake thing. This is virtual.
Right.
Wait a minute. What
Let me
world
look
do you
in the
come from?
dictionary. What this means now. So, what keeps you going? I find this as I'm starting to get more of that, and Ryan and I talked about this. We asked other people, and just I've been asked this by day one beginners, like, how do you keep going? What keeps you going? And have you ever gotten bored? I'm like, if I'm getting bored, it means I'm not doing something right. What did you say?
The only
that?
thing that bores me is having to do with mediocrity.
Mm-mm-mm.
But that detailed wiring wasn't mediocre.
Right.
But detailed wiring on a little goddammit, I call anything that's little a goddammit because it's going to die.
Right. Right.
And somebody's going to buy it and they won't know what to do with it. But they sell.
Right.
And so having to be on some level persistently producing some product to add to the store. I've got a flat out here of this is their first year as a grafted understock with Hinoki cypress on it. It's this high, and I'll wire it and do a little bit of this, and it's a beautiful little thing. But I'll do one, and then I'll say, if I spent another hour and a half or 2 hours on it, it would really be terrific because I'd put the little fine wire on.
Right.
But I can't sell it for that.
Right.
And so I'm assailed by that sometimes, but I never flag in terms of my zeal. And it's mainly because I really think that garden down there is so extraordinary in its size and composition and
It's like a life of its own, right?
unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
That I can't abandon it.
Right. Right.
And I don't really want to anyhow.
Right.
And I'm physically fit enough.
Yeah.
That I can do it all day.
I mean, I saw you picking up pots today
Every
that most
day.
guys our age wouldn't even pick up.
I do. I do my 80 push-ups every morning, and it keeps me shoulders good, and I got shitty balance and some of that stuff, but I can deal with that.
Work
Let
around
somebody
it,
else hold me up. I'll lift it up for you.
Right.
That kind of thing. So I keep real able, in some sense. There's a machine downstairs that I should get on and do something for cardiovascular. I had a heart issue 5 years ago, I guess. I had a heart attack of sorts. It was wasn't the usual one. It was a calcium block on one of my coronary arteries, and I don't have any plaque.
Interesting.
But I've got calcium that blocked one of the arteries, and so they had to grind it out of there. And then everything was fine, and I don't have any heart disease, so I don't have to do anything. Then I had a dorsal aorta expansion put in stint, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
They said, well, maybe it'll give you more energy, but I've always had
Well, you always been up
all
and
the
at 'em.
energy that
I'm
I
cutting wood. I'm cutting wood.
You know, the doctors, it seems, it's kind of interesting, but once they get a hold of you, then they kind of do their best to come up with all the things they can possibly do to make things more better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's applaudable,
Mm.
you know. And luckily I'm a fireman with endless insurance, and so, oh, okay. Yeah, whatever you think. And so I had those things done. Last Christmas I had that expansion done, and I don't notice any difference, but I work all day and can prune all day long and be up on a 12-foot ladder and cut thousands of shoots, which you have to do.
Right.
And I'm pretty good with harder work, but I don't do enough of it to be in great shape for it, but I can still pull it off and do it. I just pay for it for a couple of days afterwards, saying, well, I haven't done that for a while.
Right. Feeling that cramp,
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not really in great shape, but I'm able because I've got the resources to pull it out if I have to. So just able to do it. And so I try to maintain that, deliberately avoiding machines that would do it easier, just so I'll be able to do it if I don't have a machine. I don't think much about going collecting anymore.
When was the last time you went?
Oh, it's been a couple of years now. Yeah. You know, the COVID thing, we can't go to Canada.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And I go out every once in a while and dig trees out of people's yards here. You know, we dug that big. Well, you haven't seen the super azalea.
Oh,
the world's biggest.
Tomorrow.
The world's biggest dwarf azalea
I have not seen
is at the garden.
Yeah.
Some of the trunks are this big on a dwarf.
It's
evergreen azalea.
Cluster. All this big, and then the branches are wider than my arms can
It was
reach.
16 feet wide and 8 feet tall when I saw it in this guy's yard. And
when was the last time you went collecting, just like in the mountains around here? I mean, I don't know.
I've never been around here for 25 years.
Oh, okay.
Because there just isn't anything here that's as good as I can drive up to the north end of Vancouver Island and find fabulous things, or Mount Hood.
Mount Hood's got a lot.
The Cascades here are real tough because by the time you can get up there, it's too late to dig them.
Right.
Which means you got to do it in the early fall, and by then, let's go to Canada.
Yeah.
So, and it's tough in these Cascades. You got to get real high to really get great stuff.
And
a lot
they're
of
real steep.
The high areas are protected, or in a lot of places around the Cascades.
Well, it could be. I don't ever ask. Although I do get a permit going down to Mount Hood because you can have. They'll give you 15 trees and you got a whole year to get them, and as long as they don't exceed
so many
28 inches or something in height, and you don't have to check in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of a giveaway.
It's so much easier in Ohio. Ohio, they denied us every time.
Yeah.
Have you considered possibly like going with someone but having them dig it for you and you pick out what you want?
Oh.
You know, you're like,
I suppose.
You do the dirty work, I'll pick the tree.
But I don't mind digging.
Right.
I mean, none of this stuff is that tough.
Right.
What stuff is going into the Rockies and going up to 8,500 feet and climbing and, you know, taking big crowbars and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Up in Canada, it's a bog.
Oh, okay.
And down on Mount Hood, it's that alluvial, gray,
volcanic rock,
dust, and all the roots are right
there.
Right there. It's kind of like the bald cypress, except tearing them off the substrate. Sometimes you needed a machine.
Right.
Yeah, the bald cypress.
Well, one last question. It's getting late, I know, but we thank you for chatting with us. This has been amazing. If you could tell, what would you say for new people starting to keep doing or to just get through and learn? What advice would you give?
Yeah, if you boil down all of your experience for the absolute beginner to how to create a naturalistic tree.
Well, of course, you got to start with good material. it doesn't have to be great material if you're a carver.
Right.
It just had to have some size.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So you got to think bigger.
Okay. No seed to pencil.
I mean, it's okay, but
Pencil
start
twig.
with them in the ground, and then,
Yeah.
and that's what I tell people. If you have to start with little trees, plant them in the ground. You don't have to water. Mother Nature takes care of it, assuming that midsummer you
Right.
do what you have to do.
Right.
But train them in the ground, and that's the smartest way for everybody to start.
Right.
Because you don't have to be dedicated.
Right.
You can be derelict, which everybody is sooner or later.
Especially in the beginning. When
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah.
If you go out
New
and spend
at
a
it.
lot of money on a big tree, and then you go to a party in the middle of the summer,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, you got home at 8 o'clock and it died at 4.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless it's Ponderosa at level.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So they're just that kind of thing. Start with great material. And great just means a certain magnitude
Right.
that you can impose all of these finesses on it so that you will be within hours of having something worthy.
Right.
When you start with a little goddammit,
Yeah.
it's just embarrassing. You go home with this thing and she looks at it and says,
What is
"Is that all there is?"
that?
And all you do is wait.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
that
Yeah.
is-
You're not learning anything while you wait. And starting with baby trees is fraught with waiting.
Okay.
And it's a hopeless wait if it's a little tree
Right.
to achieve magnitude in a bonsai pot
Right.
because it's a 200-year plant.
Right.
So there's just some education that has to be inculcated into the novice's mind so that they don't get caught up in a waste of time.
Right. Right.
And so whether that means buying a big plant at a nursery, I mean, obviously you want to talk to, find something with what looks like an interesting trunk. But
Right. Right.
even if it's straight,
Right.
you can carve interest into it. So
Right.
there's no limit.
Right.
It's just, and the tools you need a Makita die grinder.
If you're going to
And you need a pair of pruners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you don't need a concave cutter because it's the enemy of good bonsai. Okay?
Understood.
Because it cuts off all the dead wood.
Somebody told me recently. I met Kathy Shane at the national show.
Oh, yeah.
She's a really nice person, and I think we were talking about the same thing. You know, we weren't recording obviously because it was a national show, but she said, I think it was her, said somebody told her to tell people that are new, don't buy 10 trees that are $10 a piece, small ones.
Yeah.
Buy one tree that's $100, that's bigger, that gets you the results faster, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if I would have done that, I would have still saved more money.
Well, yeah.
And my wife wouldn't be as mad at me.
Yeah.
And you'd save space on your bench.
Exactly. You know.
Yeah, you just got to start with some magnitude. Now, I've got some little trees that have as much character. Did you know Weichel? He's the curator of the thing at Michigan, University of Michigan.
Oh,
the bonsai
okay.
thing.
Michael Hagner's new apprentice was working with that too. I remember. Yeah.
Something Weichel.
Heard the name.
He just sent me a pitch
Oh, okay.
wanting a donation
Okay.
to the University of Michigan's bonsai collection,
Yeah.
which he's the curator of and has been for years.
Mhm.
Anyhow, I first met him with Jerry. Whose name I've lost already.
Something like
See,
that.
my memory's practically gone. But
It's late too.
yeah, the ophthalmologist. They
The
were
ficus
both.
guy.
Yeah,
Oh,
and they were Confederates in Ann Arbor, and he had this bonsai collection, and we went to see it out in his yard, and here was a few trees out there. The only thing that was really interesting is he had an American elm. It was an old one that somehow was a survivor, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. It wasn't a great tree, but it was an American elm. I've got one, by the way.
Oh,
Down
nice.
there with a trunk that's that big.
Right at the beginning of the garden.
Okay,
Yeah.
I probably passed it.
It's
It
kind
was
of a shitty
so
thing,
wet and puddly today.
but there it is. And And but down in his basement, under lights that were here and the plants were right here, with these tiny little miniature, gnarly, tropical things that he was working with. And I remember seeing that. Wow. Wow. So it doesn't have to be huge, but that's a very difficult thing to pass on to people.
Space and size.
Size counts.
Yeah.
On some level.
Yeah.
It helps.
And
girth in a sense, but not too big where you can't carry it.
But my whole thing is to impose value on that tree sculpturally. Branch patterns is a craft, but the sculpture is something totally new.
Right.
And it can be just unbelievably exciting once you accept it as something that you can do to a tree. I mean, some people are just offended by dead wood at all. So
as I said today,
a different club you should join.
Right.
This club is, but that's kind of the direction that I have almost always been with people, is start with something great.
Start with something great.
And whether you buy it or collect it or get it out of somebody's yard, even if you have to do it late at night, running fast with tree in hand is good exercise. So.
Gotta make that a t-shirt.
I was pointing out a tree that disappeared from my purview after 50 years of want. I've been wanting this azalea in Bremerton for easily 50 years. It's a ruby red variety of azalea, dwarf evergreen, but just a fabulous red. It isn't the crimson; it's a whole different thing, and you just don't see any of them. And here was a big one in this yard, and I was a fireman in that town, and I'd drive by, and I could see the trunk and everything. I just somehow never got around to it. And I've knocked on doors and bought trees from people. For some reason, I just didn't. Well, it's always a busy street.
Yeah.
Very well, and there's never a place to park real easy. And oh well.
Maybe next
bring your construction codes.
And now it's gone. The only thing gone out of that yard is my azalea. And now I'm pissed enough to want to go in and find out, well, where did it go? And where do they live? And I'm going to buy that thing after that much want. I just have earned it.
Right.
Just out of being devoted.
Right.
As a voted fan.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, some things, that's about the only thing that I've really missed out on as I think about it. There aren't many things that I've seen that I haven't been able to achieve satisfaction one way or another on something else that I did. In other words, I don't see other people's trees and say, oh, God, I got to have that. I've got so much stuff. And I love it all, whether it's a stalactite from China or whether it's this thing that I bought at the flea market in Guilin or something like that. I'm just kind of surrounded with stuff that I love, and a lot of it I've found, and so it's endlessly gratifying. And then I got some things that I bought in Korea, and I've got the first bonsai that I grew from seed, and I've had that for 65 years, and a whole bunch of other ones that I've had for 60 years, and I've got my very first bonsai is out there in the garden. It's a mugo pine that I bought at that nursery that my uncle had. It was a mugo pine.
Right.
And I had it trained as the tree on top of the mountain, so it hung down on all sides. It was kind of a stupid design, I guess. Gradually, the arms kind of died off.
Right.
Oh, now it's just one.
It looks real.
Yeah. But the wood is really almost gone.
Oh, okay.
So it's slowly rotting away, the dead wood on there. I never treated it. I used to use a thing called cures rot on the dead wood. And of late, I've been using the penetrating epoxy, which I think is probably pretty good stuff. I treated one of my hinokis with it just a month ago. We cleaned it all up and the whole front carving and all of this was just, I could push it and it was kind of rotten, covered with lichen. It all just saturated, see what happens. So I saturated the lichen and everything else, and all it's all real hard now. I don't know what will happen, but if you lose a lot of that feature, it's just not as interesting. It's just a big cavity,
Right.
Which is what you wind up when a thing gets hollow. Of course, when parts of it start to grow back
Right,
inside.
like today, yeah.
And I've got that on 2 different trees. I've got that on a maple.
I think 2 different maples too.
Mm-hmm.
There's that real tall one in the same area.
The giant one that's way out there next to the pot that was broken.
Mm-hmm.
That big maple out there. That's just an amazing tree. And it's got stuff growing back inside of it, and roots coming up into the hollow part. From down below, it's just a gnarly mess in there.
That's cool.
Just a grand old tree. And, anyhow.
Where can people reach you? Like, can they find you online?
I have no idea.
There is a website.
There's a website? Okay.
And it's elandangardens.com. I can do this part for him.
Okay.
And there is a garden. It's called Elandan Gardens.
Right.
It's in Bremerton.
Yeah.
What days are you open?
And there's an Instagram. And
Well,
a
normally
Facebook page.
we're only closed on Monday.
Okay.
But last year we were only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay.
And in the wintertime, it's just Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay.
Just don't know what's coming up this year.
Right.
It's pretty tough on the lady in my life.
Right.
Me, I could get up and
Right. You'll work on
I'm going to
trees.
the garden. But I don't have to tend with customers.
Yeah.
By the time they come out in the garden, I win.
Right. Right.
And for her, she's got to convince people that the garden is worthy. If you know what I mean.
Yes.
It costs you $10 to go through there. And
it's worth it.
well, if you're interested, and even if you aren't, you're going to come back real enthused.
Yeah.
Because there's stuff out there that you're not going to see really anywhere. And,
Even the way you look at the sound in the water.
well, yeah, the whole scape is just,
it's another world.
wow, where did this...
It's definitely, if I can say this in the highest respect, it's taken the life of itself on its own self, It's living its own thing now.
Yeah. I love the landscape. It's all about the mounds, the stone.
Right.
And then the dessert is all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And we've got all those great ingredients, and it's just...
In the Pacific Northwest.
And we do. My son does most of the landscaping now. And it's really interesting because I just kind of turn it over to him. I just soon prune for people. I prune, I get paid. I don't... There's no real battle over stuff.
Right.
And dealing with people's wants. No, let me do this for you. I'll make it look great.
Right.
I mean, here's my garden. Do you see anything you like here? And nobody has anything like it. But we went... This guy bought this pine tree from a nursery up in Bainbridge Island, and he didn't have any way to get it to his house over in Tacoma. He's an old client of mine from years ago. We did a landscaping for him. He's an attorney or something. We bought this tree, and there it is at this nursery. And so he said, could you rescue me and pick that tree up and bring it to your garden and then come and plant it in my yard? Which all sounds like,
right.
Okay.
Right.
But I turned it over to my son because he lives on Bainbridge, and so it was easy for him to stop at that nursery, bring it down to the garden. So we had it for 6 months while he's having time to do this little job in Tacoma, and it turns out that it's 65 feet up a bank
Oh, wow.
to where the tree's going, and of course you got to get some dirt up there and some rocks. And he's got the crane, but it only reaches 60 feet, so we had to buy an extension to put on the end of the crane to get the extra footage. And anyhow, he wanted me to come with him to do it. And it was a weeping densiflora that wasn't too bad, but it really just kind of did some stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go over there, and we're over there with another guy, one of his good school friends, whose name is Daniel. So that was easy to remember his name. And anyhow, I get over there, and then I start looking at this guy's yard, and I'm seeing all these things that need to be done. You know, this whole thing should come out of this maple, and he's kind of afraid to prune, and so then he's wanting. So it turned into a real day of everything turned out great, but I wind up turning the whole system around in terms of the way that I compose the shape of the pine and the rock that supports the dirt, that puts it on the mound, that elevates it so that it looks good in this place in his yard. And of course, my son is way down there running the crane.
Right.
And so, okay, I know how to do this, but it just wasn't the way it was planned, but it turned out looking great and everybody's happy. And so,
good.
But I still am look at things different than, but everybody does. You know, they see things differently, and but if the difference it winds up boring, then and so that's the nice thing about that garden. There's nothing down there that isn't. Wow, look at that.
Like we were talking about earlier, you either have a positive or negative reaction to it. There's no. It's like, I don't know how I feel about that. You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the best reaction because it's honest.
It's disruptive. Yeah.
It's an honest reaction. It's like.
I mean, we plunk ingredients, and we get a new thing, and we just I just put that big snag up that's out in the entryway that the light is hanging from.
Yeah.
Just a fabulous piece of wood. And just put it up there a couple months ago. But I've had it for years laying down. Finally, I said, come on, let's stand that up. I went to all the trouble to bring it here and bolt it together. And
I have to ask. And remember you had your showcase at the Pacific Bonsai Museum.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful showcase.
Yeah.
And I will say, I love how you just do it to your true self of like colored pot, glazed pot, the old traditional thing. That was so cool. Like, oh, that's awesome. But the big, long piece of deadwood, do you still have that? You know the one I'm talking about? That was probably had
it's
12 feet long.
It's a root chunk thing.
That is, okay, wow. I was like, where did you get that?
Yeah, it's a cedar root, but for some reason there was a dominant root that came off of one side and then went over here 6 or 8 feet over this way. It
was like it's on the display shelf.
It's right out the back door. I'll show you that tomorrow.
I saw that laying down. I was just like taken back. Like, that is huge.
Yeah.
That is
really quite light, actually.
Oh, really? Okay. I was like, man, the girth of that length, and how do you get it, truck bed, I'm sure. But
now, you didn't go there when I had my retrospective. You went for the Japanese show.
No, I did go for your retrospective.
Oh.
I did.
That's where you saw that piece of wood.
Yeah, because I think that was the first time
it was the first thing that you came to in my show.
Yep.
And then there were 3 or 4 bonsais intermingled with it.
Yep. I remember there was a hemlock with the blue. Remember the
there's a ponderosa pine that I've had since 1965. Came off of Chinook Pass Blewett Pass. I've got that. That's out here.
I'll see it tomorrow morning.
And the snow is gone.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll see some trees.
That'll be good.
Yeah, that's a great old pine. Had that a long time. And they've never been happy for me. Now, that one that I got back from the retrospective, if I can have my ponderosas look like that. So if it means once a week fertilizing, you suppose?
Maybe that's
you
what
might have to break the cycle.
Yeah, because it's always, what's going to die this year?
Yeah.
As far as the
ponderosas.
Okay.
Only the ponderosa. And they've always been a favorite, and they were the first ones that I found. But they've all in decline until that one came back, and suddenly, wow!
What did they do different?
Maybe they fertilize it once a week.
Miracle.
They're using basically the same fertilizer thing. They may put an occasional something different.
I think for the natives exhibit, you were saying at that time they were using like the BioGold organic stuff.
Yeah, but they don't use it anymore.
Oh, okay.
They don't, but they use Miracle Grow, which is all I ever, that's all I fertilize with. I mean, it's all about nitrogen for me.
Right.
It's nitrogen and water. All this other stuff, and trace elements. Tell me about the trace elements you get where the tree grew in a crack in limestone. What are the trace elements that are critical? And yet it can live for hundreds of years in there with nothing. Not even water.
Right.
Because the roots somehow found a
source.
So I think that all of that is true, but to me it's uncritical. You don't have to do it. But for a lot of people, this is their fame. Is that I know all about soil composition and the trace elements that you got to have for perfect plant growth or something like that. And the perfect thing for me is the water, because without it, and that's the one thing that's common in nature. It's all about the water. It isn't there.
Right. Do you collect rainwater?
No.
No. Okay.
All comes out of the hose, and it has a minimum amount of chlorine. Because it's so pristine, they just put in enough to meet the state requirements. And it's well water.
Okay.
And it's from right across the street. And by the time it leaves the nozzle, there's no chlorine in it.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah,
because you get it out in the air, which is being a water purification guy.
Right, I was going to say, definitely helped.
Yeah. So it's anyhow, in here we drink out of the lake. Spring-fed lake. There's no streams that feed it. It all comes from the Olympic Mountains.
Definitely got good water.
It's just a rare thing.
I'll try some tap
Have
water.
a drink. Have a drink.
I miss good tap water. Ohio's is nasty.
Well, we should go to bed.
Yeah, I'm like, It's top more
Yeah,
tap
you've
water.
traveled
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
halfway across the
country.
Thank you all for watching. You can find more work by Dan Robinson at his Instagram, Elandan Gardens Bonsai, at their website, elandangardens.com, or you can find their book, Gnarly Branches, Ancient Trees, written by Will Hiltz. You can also visit Dan's public bonsai garden in person at Elandan Gardens in Bremerton, especially if you call ahead and check the hours on their website. And we will link to all of these resources in our show notes, so hope to see you at Elandan Gardens someday.
Thank you for listening. Today's episode has been recorded, produced, and edited by Kevin Ferris and Ryan Houston. Our music was provided by MIDI Cancer. To find more music from MIDI Cancer, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To find more information on the podcast, please check out our Instagram page, Bonsai Time Podcast, and our website, bonsaitimepodcast.com. To stay in touch with us, Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris, PNW, and Ryan's website is Rai2tree2.com. You can find these links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and bonsai on!